The wind howled across the Texas plains as darkness fell, and John Mackenzie knew he was in for a cold night. He'd been tracking his missing cattle for 2 days, and now he found himself miles from his ranch with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and a single wool blanket rolled behind his saddle. The November chill was already seeping into his bones, and he knew the temperature would drop even further once the sun disappeared completely. He was setting up a meager camp near a cluster of rocks when he heard it, a soft whimpering sound that didn't belong to any animal he recognized. His hand instinctively moved to his rifle, but something made him pause. The sound came again, weaker this time, and unmistakably human. He stood slowly, following the noise around the rocks until he found them. 2 young Apache girls, neither older than perhaps 10 or 12 years, huddled together in a shallow depression in the ground. Their clothing was torn and insufficient for the dropping temperature, and even in the fading light, he could see they were shivering violently. One had blood on her arm from what looked like a deep scratch, and both had faces streaked with tears and dirt. John had lived on the frontier long enough to know the complicated and often violent history between settlers and the Apache people. There had been raids, retaliations, and countless deaths on both sides. Many ranchers would have walked away, or worse. But John Mackenzie had never been like most men. His own daughter would have been about the same age as these girls if she had lived, and he couldn't look at their frightened faces without seeing her. "Easy now," he said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The older girl pulled her sister closer, her dark eyes wide with terror but also defiant. She said something in Apache that he didn't understand, but the meaning was clear: stay back. John slowly backed away and returned to his camp, giving them space. He built up his fire larger than necessary, knowing they would be able to feel its warmth even from their hiding spot. He prepared the little food he had, some jerky and hardtack, and left half of it on a flat rock between his camp and where the girls were hiding. Then he made a show of settling down for the night, wrapping himself in his coat and turning his back to them, though he remained alert. After what felt like hours, he heard the soft scuffle of movement. When he carefully glanced over his shoulder, he saw the younger girl darting forward to grab the food, her sister watching anxiously from the rocks. They ate ravenously, and John's heart ached thinking about how long they must have been out here alone. As the night grew colder, truly bitter now, John heard the girl's teeth chattering even over the crackling of the fire. He looked at his blanket, the only thing standing between him and a miserable, possibly dangerous night of cold. He thought about his wife, Mary, who had always told him that kindness was never wasted, even when it cost you something. He thought about his daughter, and how he would have wanted someone to help her if she had ever been lost and afraid. John stood up slowly, took his blanket, and walked toward the rocks. The older girl immediately tensed, ready to run, but he simply laid the blanket on the ground halfway between them and his camp, then returned to his fire without a word. He sat down and wrapped his coat tighter around himself, preparing for a long, cold night. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then he heard whispered voices in Apache, a discussion or perhaps an argument. Finally, the older girl emerged, grabbed the blanket, and hurried back. John smiled to himself and poked at the fire, adding more wood. At least they would be warm. The night was indeed brutal. Without his blanket, John dozed only fitfully, waking every time the wind picked up or his shivering became too violent. He kept the fire going strong, as much for the girls as for himself. Several times he heard them stirring, and once he was certain he heard soft crying, but he didn't approach. He had given what he could. The rest was up to them to decide if they could trust him. Dawn was still just a suggestion on the horizon when John heard something that made his blood run cold. It was a sound he had heard before, the thunder of many horses moving together. He stood quickly, his hand moving to his rifle, and then he saw them. Coming over the rise, silhouetted against the lightning sky, were hundreds of Apache warriors on horseback. John's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to count them, at least 300, maybe more. They were armed and moving with clear purpose, and they were heading straight for his camp. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to mount his horse and try to escape, but he knew it would be futile. They would run him down in minutes. Instead, he stood his ground, his rifle at his side but not raised, trying to appear non-threatening while also refusing to show fear. The warriors surrounded his camp in moments, a perfect circle of mounted fighters. John had never felt so small and vulnerable in his life. Then the circle parted, and a tall, imposing man rode forward. He was clearly a leader, wearing a magnificent headdress and sitting his horse with absolute authority. His face was weathered and severe, his eyes sharp as obsidian. The chief dismounted and walked toward John, and despite his fear, John noticed something. The man was looking past him, toward the rocks where the girls were hiding. The older girl emerged, still clutching John's blanket, her sister right behind her. They ran to the chief, speaking rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward John and the blanket. The chief listened intently, his expression unreadable. John stood frozen, unsure if he should speak or remain silent. When the girls finished talking, the chief turned his full attention to John. The weight of that gaze was almost physical. "You gave them your blanket," the chief said in surprisingly good English. "On a cold night, you gave them your only protection from the cold." John swallowed hard. "They needed it more than I did, sir. They're just children." "They are my granddaughters," the chief said, and John felt his stomach drop. "They wandered from our camp 3 days ago, following a deer. We have been searching ever since." "I didn't know," John said quickly. "I just found them last night, cold and scared. I couldn't leave them like that." The chief studied him for a long moment. "Many of your people would have. Many have done far worse to Apache children they have found alone." John couldn't deny that truth. "I'm not those people." "No," the chief agreed. "You are not." He turned and spoke to his warriors in Apache, a long speech that John couldn't understand. When he finished, several warriors dismounted and began unpacking items from their horses. The chief turned back to John. "You protected my blood when you had no reason to do so, when it cost you comfort and safety. You could have left them to die in the cold, or you could have harmed them, and no one would have known. Instead, you gave them food, warmth, and safety, asking nothing in return." "Anyone decent would have done the same," John said, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. "Perhaps," the chief said. "But you did do it. And for that, you have earned something rare, the friendship of the Mescalero Apache." What happened next amazed John. The warriors brought forward blankets, beautiful woven blankets far finer than the one he had given away. They brought food, enough to last him weeks. They brought leather goods and tools. They even brought 2 prime cattle, clearly recognizing them as from John's own herd based on the brand. "We found these wandering," the chief explained. "They are yours, yes?" John nodded, stunned. "Yes, those are mine. I've been looking for them." The chief smiled, the first warmth John had seen in his expression. "Then they are returned to you, with our gratitude. More than this, I give you my word, my protection. You may move safely through Apache lands. My people will know you as friend, not enemy. If you are ever in need, you need only ask." John was overwhelmed. "Sir, I don't know what to say. The blanket, it was nothing, just common decency." "Common decency is not as common as you might think, especially between our peoples," the chief said gravely. "You saw 2 children in need, not 2 Apache in enemy territory. That is worth more than you know." The older granddaughter approached John shyly and said something in Apache. The chief translated. "She says thank you, and she is sorry you were cold because of her." John knelt down to the girl's level. "You don't need to be sorry. I'm just glad you're safe now and back with your family." The younger girl, emboldened by her sister, rushed forward and hugged John briefly before running back to hide behind her grandfather. The chief laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to ease the tension still hanging in the air. "You have made an impression," he said. "They will remember the kind white rancher for all their lives." As the sun rose fully, the Apache prepared to leave. The chief clasped John's arm in a gesture of respect. "Remember, John Mackenzie, you have friends among the Apache. We do not forget kindness." John watched as the 300 warriors rode away, the 2 girls safely mounted with their grandfather, one of them still clutching his old blanket alongside the new ones they had been given. He stood there for a long time, surrounded by the gifts they had left, trying to process what had just happened. When he finally made it back to his ranch 2 days later, leading the recovered cattle and loaded down with Apache gifts, his wife Mary listened to his story in amazement. "You could have been killed," she said, though her eyes shone with pride. "I suppose I could have," John agreed. "But what kind of man would I be if I let 2 little girls freeze to death just to keep myself comfortable? What kind of world are we building out here if we can't show basic kindness to children?" Mary hugged him tightly. "The same kind, good man I married. Though perhaps a bit colder than when you left." John laughed and pulled one of the beautiful Apache blankets around them both. "Not anymore." In the years that followed, John Mackenzie became known throughout the territory as the rancher who had befriended the Apache. The relationship wasn't always easy. Tensions still ran high between settlers and natives, but John's ranch was never raided, his cattle were never stolen, and on several occasions when others faced trouble, a word from John to his Apache friends helped resolve situations that might otherwise have ended in violence. He never saw the 2 girls again, but sometimes he would find small gifts left near his property line, beaded items or woven goods, and he knew they remembered. The old blanket he had given them became something of a legend in its own right, a symbol of the peace that could exist between people if they chose compassion over fear. And on cold nights, wrapped in the fine Apache blankets, John would think about that freezing November evening when he made a choice that cost him comfort but earned him something far more valuable. Proof that kindness, even in small gestures, has the power to bridge the deepest divides and transform enemies into family.